Hi guys, welcome back to Plot Portal. So we are on to episode 6 and on to part 2 of exploring Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. We're comparing the books and the films and sort of hypothesising and predicting what we hope they do with the upcoming HBO series that's due to come out in 2026. I'm literally just going to get straight into it. We've got lots to go through. If you're enjoying this podcast, please don't forget to subscribe and give it a huge thumbs up. I'd be so grateful, and have the notification bell on so you don't miss every episode because there's always a new one every week. But yeah, let's just get started. If you haven't listened to the previous episode, make sure you listen to that first because we go through the first part of Prisoner of Azkaban in there, and we're now on to a little bit later on in Prisoner of Azkaban. So we're on to the bit sort of where the Marauders map gets introduced, and we encounter a very big thing that's missed out in the films. And it's extremely pivotal and it's just not explained at all. Who are the Marauders? So in the film, we learn about Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs, but they do not explain exactly who they are. Moony, you're sort of able to figure out for yourself that, okay, Lupin is a werewolf, so he's probably Moony. But again, it doesn't explicitly say. You are able to sort of figure out and guess that who represents each one. But in the books, it's much more clear and it explains which each of them are and why they are called that. But the one that isn't explained at all is Prongs. So the whole thing with Harry's Patronus is always explained of, oh yeah, it's a stag because James's Patronus was a stag. But it goes so much more beyond that in the book. The reason why the symbol of a stag is so important in Harry Potter, why James's Patronus was a stag and why Harry's was a stag, was because James was an animagus and could turn into a stag. And he was therefore Prongs. At no point in the films is there any mention of confirming who Prongs was, why he had the nickname Prongs, and the fact that Harry's dad was an animagus. That's a huge thing just completely missed out. The fact his dad could literally transform into an animal. Completely missed out. And also there's this whole thing about the fact that Sirius, James and Peter Pettigrew were sort of illegal animagus. They turned themselves into them without registering, because if you want to become an animagus in the wizarding world, you have to register as one. It's a big process. It's only in exceptional circumstances sort of accepted. Turning yourself into an animagus is a very long process and very difficult to get right. It's all about growing things under certain moons, lighting, days, years, seasons, all of that. It's very complicated, takes a very long time. If you go wrong at one step, you have to do the whole thing again. It's very long. But they do it. It takes them a whole year, I think, to do it. And it's hard enough for one person to do it, yet 3 of them do. And they each become an animagus in order to accompany and keep Lupin company, which is so lovely. It goes even further with their friendship. In the film, it's just portrayed as, yeah, the Marauders, they were all close, they made a map. Whereas in the book, it goes so much further than that. They literally all changed their anatomy, basically, and changed who they were and did this illegal thing in order to protect their friend and keep him company when he needed them, which is so lovely. And yeah, I just find it mad that they literally miss out that James could just turn himself into a stag. Wild, and I wish they'd include that in the film. So I really hope they include that in the HBO series. I hope they give more backstory to the Marauders in general, more even than we get in the books. I think would be good. It'd be lovely if there was a whole episode dedicated to the Marauders, and maybe it being a big flashback and a whole episode of them and them going through the process of turning into animagus, everything. That would be really interesting. Yeah, I hope they explain in better detail which animagus each of them were, why they were called that, everything. That would be much better. I can imagine it now, yeah, a whole episode dedicated to showing their past, them going through the process and then going back to present day. I really hope they do something like that to give better backstory to the Marauders. The difference is then in Lupin's class when they all face the boggart. In the films, Harry faces it and a Dementor appears, and then Lupin goes in front and gets rid of it. In the books, it's actually different. So Lupin doesn't let Harry go in front of the boggart. When it's Harry's go, Lupin jumps in front of him, the moon comes up and he gets rid of it. So Harry isn't able to face the boggart at all. So nothing comes up. A Dementor doesn't come up. It's still the same as the person before, and then Lupin gets in the way. And that might not seem like a big difference, but it actually makes a lot more sense the way it happens in the book, because Lupin says to Harry, Harry's like, why did you do that? Why didn't you let me fight it? And Lupin was like, because you've gone through more than any other person let alone child, any other person in this castle, you've gone through more. And so he thought that Harry's biggest fear would probably be Voldemort. And he's like, I didn't really want Voldemort springing up in the middle of the class. I thought that might give people a fright. And so that makes complete sense. Also, I think it makes more sense that it would have been something like Voldemort. I don't think Harry would have seen a Dementor. I don't think that would have been his biggest fear. I don't think he was that scared of it. He was scared more of probably the screams he heard and of Voldemort. I don't think his biggest fear would be a Dementor. If anything, he was more like sort of intrigued and curious about Dementors because he didn't understand why it impacted him so much on the train. So I actually much prefer the book version of this, and I think it just makes more sense. So yeah, I hope the HBO series follow true to the book in that and don't do what the film did. Next we have when Sirius breaks into Hogwarts and he goes into the Gryffindor common room. So in the film, all we see is the aftermath of this. We see the fat lady's portrait's being ripped into and she's like, Sirius Black was here in the castle. But he doesn't go into Gryffindor common room in the film. In the book, this is much more extreme and much more interesting, may I add. So in the books, they're all in bed in the Gryffindor common room, and then Harry wakes up to Ron screaming, and then like a commotion, a scuffling, the door slamming. Harry looks, Ron's curtains are like ripped away and he's sat there like really scared, and he's like, what happened? And Ron's like, Sirius Black was just here standing over me with a knife. So Sirius in the book actually gets into Gryffindor common room and then is seen with a knife standing over Ron. It's just such more of a bigger deal, and then all the students have to go and sleep in the Great Hall while they search the castle. It's a huge deal. Like, Ron literally sees Sirius Black, he's standing there with a knife. It adds much more like, what on earth is going on? Like, it makes, I think as the reader, you think, oh my God, he must be really dangerous. It raises some more questions and you really start to be going back and forth about like what's happening. Because in the book it's put forward as, oh well, he must have thought it was Harry's bed, realised he got the wrong bed, it was them with Ron. So you're like, oh no, God, Sirius really does want to kill him, all of this. But then later on, what sort of comes out is that Sirius was actually looking for Peter Pettigrew. So he knows that Scabbers is with Ron. He gets into the Gryffindor common room and he goes to Ron's bed because he's looking for Scabbers. He doesn't want to kill Ron and he doesn't want to kill Harry. He's looking for Peter Pettigrew, for Scabbers, and he knows Scabbers is probably going to be in Ron's bed. So that's why he's there. And that's explained later on in the book, and you get that, oh, that makes sense. That completely makes sense. Yeah. And then when you reread it, you're like, I know why that happens. So as I've explained in previous episodes, those things that later on you get that revelation, that realisation of, oh, that explains that. And also it just makes your brain work a bit before you find that out. It's like, what's going on? Why was he there? That's also crazy. Like, the stakes are much higher. Sirius Black was just in the Gryffindor common room, in Harry and Ron's room with a knife. More than just him scratching a portrait, as what happens in the films. So I really like what happens in the book, and I hope that that's in the series. And also the reason how Sirius gets in. So it's explained in the books that the reason Sirius gets into the castle is through one of the secret passages, which again is something not explained in the films. It's just, yeah, he gets in, never explained why. Whereas in the books, we find out it's because he obviously helped make the Marauders map, so he knew about all the passageways and he got in using one of them. And Harry's feeling guilty because he has the map and he's like, I should probably hand it in because this is probably how he knows about the passages. I should probably hand it in and tell the teachers like about these passages they don't know about, but he doesn't, and it's a whole thing between him and Hermione thinking he should hand it in and everything. But yeah, it's a much bigger deal. And also, Sirius is actually able to just walk into the common room because he has the password. And the reason he has the password is because Neville had written them all down on a sheet of paper and then lost the sheet of paper. And Sirius found that paper and so knew the password and got in. And then McGonagall's like, who on earth wrote it down? Neville steps forward and then McGonagall like really punishes Neville for the next few weeks. She's like, no one tell him the password, all of this. And poor Neville then is like just stuck outside the common room all the time, not able to get in because he's not allowed any of the passwords because he basically was the reason that Sirius got in. So it just adds a little bit more for Neville. And it's just a much bigger deal, Sirius getting in, and also there's more explanation to how he gets into the castle, how he gets into the Gryffindor common room, and just much more interesting. Also, for a period of time, there's a different portrait in front of Gryffindor common room. So because the fat lady gets a bit traumatised from stuff that's happened, Sir Cadogan, who's a portrait of a knight, is put there instead, and he changes the passwords like multiple times a day, which makes Neville even more stressed. But Sir Cadogan's a character that's not in the films at all. I believe you can see him actually in one of the portraits at some point in the films, but he's not named or really explained. And I actually believe there is a deleted scene with him in. But yeah, he's actually quite a big, not a big character, but like he has many lines. And I think he shows up later in a future book as well. Like he is a little bit of a recurring character, and he's quite funny. And the fat lady goes missing as well. He is like, I know where she is, and like leads them all to where she is in a different portrait. And yeah, so Sir Cadogan's a character they just completely miss out, but also they miss out the fact that he is the temporary guardian of Gryffindor common room. They have to switch out the paintings whilst they restore the fat lady. So I think there's 2 occasions in the book where Sirius breaks in. One, he doesn't get in the common room. The second time he does. And I believe the first time when he doesn't get in, it's actually Peeves that explains it all to the headmaster. It's not the fat lady as what happens in the film. Because again, Peeves is a character they completely miss out from all of the films, but he's prevalent in basically all of the books. The poltergeist that causes absolute mayhem is completely missed out, but he's quite a good character, like an interesting character in the books. And yeah, he's the one that actually explains what happens to the fat lady, not the fat lady herself. Harry getting the firebolt. This is another difference. So in the film, Harry gets the firebolt right at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, and it says it's from Sirius. And then he goes out, flies it, and it ends with like a still of him in the air really enjoying the new broomstick. However, in the books, it's completely different. So in the books, Harry receives the firebolt in the middle of like the school year. It's after the Quidditch match where he falls off his broom breaks. Obviously, we learn later on in the books that Sirius was actually at that game. Harry thinks he sees the Grim, but it's actually Sirius in the stands as a dog. Something else missed from the films. So Sirius witnesses that, and then, yeah, Harry receives this firebolt, this lovely new broomstick, and it doesn't say who it's from. There's this big mystery around it, and Hermione's like, no, it's probably from Sirius. After they've learned about Sirius being his godfather, they're like, this needs to get tested. It could be jinxed. Anything could have happened to it, like, in order for him to try and get to you. We know what they think. He wants to harm him. And Hermione's like, you've got to get it tested. It's too risky. Ron's like, no, because Ron's really not a fan of Hermione right now because of all the Scabbers and Crookshanks stuff. And he's like, no, it'll be absolutely fine. Come on, Harry, let's test it. But then, so they go up to the common room to like sort of clean it and everything and get it ready to go and fly. And then Hermione walks in really sheepishly, sits on a like chair and like hides her face in the book. And McGonagall walks in and she's like, oh, I've just been informed that you've got this broomstick. Yeah, we need to go and test it. And then the broomstick's like confiscated and it's taken away for a while, for quite many weeks, so they can do all sorts of tests on it. They do anti-curse, spell, all sort of different charms to make sure it hasn't been tampered with. And Ron is absolutely furious with Hermione. It's like, what have you done? You've taken away this broomstick. It's going to be ruined by the time we get it back. And then it's not until the very end that they then find out it was from Sirius, because when all the truths come out, you know, Sirius is innocent. Sirius and Harry are having a chat, and Sirius is like, yeah, I hope you don't mind, like, that present I sent you. Slipped into my vault at Gringotts, got some money and bought it for you to make up for all the birthdays that I missed. Which is lovely, like, it's so nice. And also just having that extra explanation, like, all the birthdays I missed, like, oh, like, that's not in the films, even though we do know it's from Sirius. You don't get that little, like, bit. But yeah, so I much prefer how it is in the books, like the mystery behind it. So you again get that revelation, like just all the clues, all the mysteries. There's much more like just mystery in Prisoner of Azkaban that then like we get answers to at the end, and I really like that. So I hope they include that in the series. Now we're actually going to go a little bit back more onto Hermione. So linking to that Ron not being happy with Hermione and everything. So there's quite a lot more with Hermione. Firstly, Hermione gets much more stressed in Prisoner of Azkaban. She struggles, especially as the book goes on, she struggles more and more with the workload. Even though she has the time turner, she really struggles to keep up with it all. She's still doing way too many subjects. There's much more situations as well of Ron realising about the timetable doesn't make sense. Like he's really taken it upon himself to try and figure out how Hermione's going to all these things at the same time. And there's actually a moment in the book where he literally looks at her timetable and it's like, you literally have 2 lessons at the same time. How is that possible? In the films, it's only like, oh, when was Hermione there? I didn't see her get there. It's just like little bits. Whereas in the books, there's more of that solid evidence of like, what the hell, like, Hermione, look at your timetable, you have two things exactly the same time. And Hermione's like, don't be silly, Ron, I can't be in two places at once. There's, again, those little clues. It's like, what's going on? How is that the case? And then we find out later on. And then there's a moment where she gets so overwhelmed that's basically in the books, it's Hermione's walking behind Harry and Ron to go into one of the classes, and then she disappears. And they're like, where did she go? And they go back to the common room much later, and she's asleep on the sofa with her head in a book. And they're like, they wake her up and they're like, where were you? And she went, oh my God, I missed the class. They were like, how is that possible though? You were behind us and then you disappeared and are back here asleep. Like, what? And obviously as a reader, you're like, what on earth? And then later on you realise it was that she went back once to go to a class, but then fell asleep and she forgot to go back to do the second class that was at the same time, because it is all too much for her. So it just gives more depth into her storyline with the time turner. And also, yeah, there's more clues to us as to what's happening and things we can figure out, like just wonder, like, what's going on? How is she in two places at once? Why did she just disappear? That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I hope they include more of that in the series. Another difference is to do with when Harry hears the prophecy from Trelawney about the Dark Lord approaches, his servant's going to go back to him, all of that. So in the films, this happens when Harry is returning the globe that Hermione, like, threw away. But actually in the books, what happens is it happens in Harry's exam. You go through them having their exams. Harry has his divination exam, and that is when Trelawney makes the prediction, saying, so it's just slightly different circumstance. In the films, we don't see any of their exams at all. It's all just some lessons and stuff. I hope they include more in the HBO series because they will have more time to play with. I hope they include more of just those general lessons of their exams, because it just makes it more immersive, makes us understand more of just what life is like at Hogwarts, just giving us more of life at Hogwarts, building the world, just the day-to-day life. Like, it might seem mundane, but it's actually really nice, and if they do it right and just balance it out nicely, it would just be really nice to have more of that, just school life, them being students at school, having exams, the trials and tribulations of that. I hope they include that. So, and I think, yeah, one way they can do that is include the exams, so that they can include that being where Harry hears the prophecy. Another little change, says going back to Quidditch, there's a little bit of jumping back and forth here, because in Prisoner of Azkaban, a lot happens, and there is a lot of, like, just a lot of back and forth and stuff like that. So sorry if it is a bit jumpy, but we're getting through all the points anyway. So in Quidditch, so in one of the Quidditch games, so after Harry has the bad Quidditch game where he falls off his broom, there's another one where the weather's really bad again, and Hermione actually puts a spell on Harry's goggles so that the water automatically goes away. So there's more moments, actually, especially in Prisoner of Azkaban, of Hermione really showing how good of a witch she is. That is explained in the films, but I think even more so in the books. It's really explained, like, how clever she is. There's more moments of her, like, really being like, wow, how does she know that, and all of that. And then Harry's like, Hermione, you've saved me, thank you, if this works, like, you're literally the best. And it does, and he's able to actually see whilst playing Quidditch. Whether it's allowed or not, don't know, but no one mentions it. And he's able to play Quidditch and actually see through the rain because Hermione puts a little spell on his glasses. Another major Quidditch difference, throughout all of the films, they make no mention to the Quidditch Cup. Whereas in the books, this is huge, from especially the first 3 books. One of the sort of consistent storylines is that every year, Oliver Wood, the captain of the Gryffindor team, is desperate for them to win the Quidditch Cup. It's this little, like, side story almost of every time they play Quidditch, it's like, will they win the cup this year? Will they? It's this ongoing thing. The first 2 years, they don't win it because there's always, like, an unfortunate thing that happens. So Harry missing the last game in the first one because of all the events with Quirrell. The second one, the Quidditch Cup gets cancelled, and then in the third year, they finally win it. And it's this ongoing thing, and firstly, it adds much more to Oliver Wood, because Oliver Wood's only in, like, Philosopher's Stone and a little bit of Chamber of Secrets, whereas he's shows up a lot more in, especially the first 3 books. Shows up a lot more, has a lot more lines, is a bigger player, a bigger person in it. So I hope he's shown more in the series, but also that, like, side story of the Quidditch Cup, and that being something else that, like, they're working towards. Because that, again, just shows more of Hogwarts life, that's something else they're all going for. As well as the House Cup, they're also all going for the Quidditch Cup. And that sort of story of Gryffindor haven't won it for years. I believe the last time they won it, we figure out, is actually when like James was in the team or something like that. And then finally, in Oliver Wood's last year at Hogwarts, he's literally about to leave, and in the book, he's being really harsh on them all. He's like, we've got to win. It's our last chance. I've never won it. We've got to win it. We've got the best team ever. We've never had a better seeker, better beaters or anything. Like, we have to win it. And he is like desperate and manic about it, which is quite, it might seem a bit extreme, but it's like, oh, like you really feel for Wood, especially on the one when they don't win because Harry falls off. Harry asks like, where's Oliver Wood? And Fred and George are like, he's currently trying to like drown himself in the shower, like he's been in there for hours. So we learn much more about Oliver, and you really feel for him, and you really root for them to win the cup. Like, you desperately want it for Oliver, really. So I really hope they include that. I think it's a great sideline. And that moment in Prisoner of Azkaban, they win the Quidditch Cup. And it's such a lovely scene. Like, Oliver's crying. You see Fred and George celebrating. Like, it's lovely. They like celebrate into the night. It's a big party in the Gryffindor common room. Like, again, it's just more of that Hogwarts life, and it's really lovely. So I really hope they include that. Next, we have a few points about Crookshanks, Scabbers, and the relationship between Hermione, Ron, and Harry. So obviously we see in both the books and the films about this ongoing feud between Crookshanks and Scabbers, and therefore between Hermione and Ron. But this is much more extreme in the books. So there is a moment in the books where Scabbers goes missing. So in the film, Scabbers goes missing, but it's just Scabbers gone, you can't see in it, Hermione. And they have a bit of an argument, and that's sort of it. Whereas in the books, Ron comes storming down in the Gryffindor common room from his dormitory, and he's like, Scabbers is gone, Crookshanks has eaten him. And Hermione's like, well, you have no proof. Ron's like, actually, yes, I do. And he holds up the bed sheet that's got blood on it, and then a handful of ginger hair. He's like, see, there's blood on it, so Scabbers is clearly dead, and there's ginger hair here on my bed, so Crookshanks has been on it and has eaten Scabbers. And as a result of this, from that moment on, Ron doesn't speak to Hermione. For a bit, Harry and Hermione are still talking, but then because obviously Harry is just spending more time with Ron, they gradually get a bit more distant. And then also Hermione, in Harry's opinion, gets a bit more overbearing. Like, she's now trying to stop him from going to Hogsmeade and keeping on mentioning things about, like, you know, oh, you've got to be careful. And Harry's just getting a bit fed up because he's fed up of being sort of coddled, told what he can and can't do. He's also just, as I mentioned in the last episode, like, he's going through it emotionally, has a lot to come to terms with. So he sort of, not really purposefully, but also ends up sort of shutting Hermione out. And so for quite a while in the book, like many chapters, like much longer than you would think, Hermione's basically not there because Harry and Ron aren't speaking to her. And it's for I'd say like a good, maybe not quite quarter, but maybe quarter or third of the book where they're not talking to Hermione, and Hermione's basically not in it. And there's like a moment where Harry goes to Hogsmeade. It says like Harry makes a show of saying goodbye to Ron in front of Hermione, so she doesn't know that he's going to Hogsmeade, because Hermione actually says to Harry, it gets so bad that Hermione's like, well, if you're going to go, I'll tell on you. I'll tell McGonagall. Like, she also gets a bit frantic because she's struggling so much with her workload. She also, a bit manic, goes a little bit frantic and very stressed. But so does Harry, because he's stressed about everything he's learning. And so does Ron, because he's really traumatised over his rats. But Harry and Ron do completely shut Hermione out. And that's actually quite sad. I find that really upsetting in the books that they don't speak to her. Because I remember, like, when I read that, I wasn't expecting it when I first read it, because that hadn't happened in the films. And I was just like, oh, like, all this time and, like, they're just not friends with Hermione. And even though I don't like it, I do hope they include it in the HBO series, because it's quite a key point. It's a very big difference that they made in the films. So I really hope they include it in the HBO series, because as I keep saying, if they don't include things like that, what's the point in them? Like, if they're going to stay true to the books, then do it and do it properly. Something that's different is in books, Harry, Ron and Hermione say to Hagrid, like, we'll help you with the Buckbeak trial. Like, it's a much bigger deal about this trial. It goes on for longer as well. It goes on for much longer. What's going to happen. Basically, though, because Harry and Ron are so upset with Hermione in their own world, they end up not helping Hagrid. And it's Hermione by herself is going to Hagrid's every single day, helping Hagrid, helping build a case for Buckbeak, along with all of her work that she's doing. And then it ends up being Hermione going to Ron and Harry and being like, look, I know you're not talking to me, but I just thought you should know that Buckbeak lost his appeal, because he gets sentenced to death, then they appeal it. Hermione really works on the appeal, but then the appeal gets rejected. And Harry and Ron, because they're in their own world, forget to go and visit Hagrid for weeks or even months, I think it is. And they forget to help and forget to even see him. But Hermione doesn't. She goes, continuously helps him, and then she has to be the one to go and tell Harry and Ron about Buckbeak. It actually shows a nice side to Hermione as well, because it shows what a nice person she is, how much she wants to help those she cares about. Because it's always like Hagrid, Harry and Ron, but it shows a bit more of a close connection between Hagrid and Hermione, which is quite nice. So I really hope they include that in the HBO series. It'd be really interesting to see how they approach that, and it would just be interesting seeing that portrayed on the screen, because we didn't see that in the films. And then their sort of feud and that gets so out of hand and goes on for so long. Hagrid then is the one to chat to Harry and Ron and be like, look, why aren't you speaking to her? Like, what's going on? And there's a moment he's like, I'd have thought better than you. He's like, I thought better than you would basically push your friend away when she's only looking out for you. And yeah, okay, maybe she was a bit extreme with it, but she was really looking out for you. And Hagrid says to Ron, like, she's been, crying every day, coming here crying, because she feels so bad about Scabbers and, really wants you to forgive her. And it's just like, when you're reading it, it like breaks your heart. It's like, oh, as much as Hermione does come across as stubborn, especially in the film, comes across as stubborn, really defending Crookshanks, you then hearing that from Hagrid in the books, but like she's really upset about it, feels absolutely awful. It's like, oh. And yeah, the fact that Hagrid has to step in, like lovely soft Hagrid who never has a go at Harry and Ron or anything, is like, look boys, you need to sort yourselves out because you've really upset her and she doesn't deserve it. It's like, yes, Hagrid. And it really, I think it actually makes you as a reader, it's a little bit of a turning point with Hermione, because I think in the first two films in the first half of Prisoner of Azkaban, there is that element of her that's just a bit annoying, that you are a bit like, oh God. Especially if you think, like, she doesn't become a proper part of the trio until about halfway through Philosopher's Stone. And then there's a load of Prisoner of Azkaban where she's not talking to them. So yeah, it is a bit like, she can actually still be seen as like a bit of an annoying character. A bit of a third wheel with Harry and Ron. But I think from that moment on, when they have that falling out, then Hagrid talks to them and you really see how much Hermione cares. Through all of that, you really see how much Hermione cares, how much she would do for her friends and the people she cares about. I actually think it's quite a turning point for Hermione in how the reader sees Hermione. It's like she changes from being this annoying character to a fundamental part of the Golden Trio and of someone you actually quite like. So I really hope they include that in the HBO series. I think it gives a lot of development to Hermione. At that time when she's not there, you miss her. You're like, oh, please talk to Hermione again. And I think that's when you make you realise, okay, like she is a main part of the trio now. Like she does belong there. If there's any doubts of her belonging with Harry and Ron, now those doubts are gone. So I actually think it's quite important and I hope they include it in the series. There's a lovely moment then when, I can't remember exactly how it happens, but basically Ron finally is like, don't worry, Hermione, because I think Hermione gets upset over something and then Ron's like, don't worry, Hermione, we'll figure it out together, we'll do it. And then Hermione like bursts into tears, gives Ron a hug and he doesn't know what to do. He's like, oh, and then Hermione's like, oh, I'm so sorry, Ron. I'm really sorry about Scabbers and everything. And Ron like pats her awkwardly and is like, don't worry, he was old anyway. Maybe Mum and Dad will finally get me an owl. So like bring some light to it. And it's actually that like closure between them as well, where they both acknowledge it to each other, both apologise. And it's just, yeah, nice closure that we don't get in the films. And just a nice moment between them, that proper forgiveness. And so I really hope they include that in the series. Okay, I'm actually going to pause there because I think there was quite a lot to digest there. There's a lot of big plot points there, like plot differences and everything. Whereas in the last one, it was a lot of little things. This part, it was a lot of big moments. So I'm going to pause there so we can digest it all. So we have got more to go through. So there will be one more part to the Prisoner of Azkaban part of this season. So there will be one more episode where we wrap up Prisoner of Azkaban and go through some more of the differences that happen in the later part of the book. And we've got some really interesting things, so make sure you stay tuned so you don't miss that. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please give it a huge thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the future episodes. Hit that notification bell as well so you'll know when I post a new video. A new Plot Portal episode goes up every Sunday. Let me know in the comments what you thought, if there's any points that you think they missed out in any of the Harry Potter films that you want them to include in the HBO series. Let me know in the comments because I'm going to be collating them all together and including them in the podcast. I really hope you enjoyed, guys. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you next week.